Good morning, class 12 students. Today we are going to begin a new chapter. It is called The Enemy and it is written by Paul S. Buck. So, before we proceed with the text, let's discuss a few things about the author. Pearl S. Buck, she was born in the year 1892. She is an American writer and novelist. She also has a Chinese name as she spent her childhood in China. Her Chinese name is Sai Zhanzu. And being the daughter of missionaries, she was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in 1932. And yes, she was also awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in the year 1938. So indeed, this is a very great achievement. So the chapter, The Enemy, it is set in the days of Second World War, right? And an American prisoner, as it is written here, let me just highlight. So, an American prisoner of war, he is washed ashore in a miserable state and is found at the doorsteps of a Japanese doctor, Dr. Sadao. So now the Dr. Sadao is in dilemma, where the dilemma is, in Hindi we say dharam sankat, right? So he's actually in dilemma whether to save him as a doctor or hand him over to the army as a patriot. So this will remain a question throughout the chapter. So what will he do? Let's find out. Right, children? So I will be highlighting the text for you so that you could actually keep the track of the chapter, and then I'll explain the chapter. So Dr. Sadao Hoki's house was built on a spot of the Japanese coast where as a little boy he had often played. So in this paragraph, the writer is introducing the main character, Dr. Sadao, and she is telling us about Dr. Sadao's house, that that his house is situated on the coast of Japan, and yes, he had been living there since his childhood. The low square stone house was set upon a rocks well above narrow beach that was outlined with bent pines. Now we get to know that Dr. Sadao's house, it is made of stone, and it was constructed upon the rocky beach, which has a boundary line that is made with pine trees, right? Okay. So, as a boy, Sadao had climbed the pines, supporting himself on his bare feet, as he had seen men do in South Seas when they climb for coconuts. So, Dr. Sadao, he would climb the pine trees, in order to get the coconuts from the trees, and he would actually learn this technique from those men, right? Those who they would try to get coconuts from the trees, and that's how Dr. Sadao learned. And in his childhood, he would climb up the pine trees, the same way those coconut collectors would do, right? His father had taken him often to the islands of those seas, and never had he failed to say that to that little brave boy at his side, "Those islands yonder." Yonder means at some distance. Let me highlight. Okay, yonder, right? They are stepping stones to the future of Japan. So his father would often take him to the islands of the South Seas, and his father would point towards the island, and he would say that those were the stepping stones toward the future of Japan. "Where shall we step from them?" Sadao asked. Seriously, Sadao was he was a kid, so he would ask his father that where they would reach from those islands, and the father used to answer. His father had answered, "Who can limit our future? It depends on what we make it." So according to him, the future has no limit. It is up to you how you want to shape it. Okay, next paragraph. Sadao had taken this into his mind, as he did everything his father said. His father, who never joked, played with him, but who spent infinite pains upon him, who was his only son. So Dr. Sadao and his father, they actually shared a very mature relationship, right? His father never joked, or he never joked or they played, because they shared a very mature relationship. And moreover, Dr. Sadao's father, he took a lot of pain in upbringing his only son. Sadao knew that his education was his father's chief concern. For this reason, he had been sent at 22 to America to learn all that could be learned of surgery and medicine. And that is why Sadao was aware that his father's chief concern was Sadao's education. That is why Dr. Sadao was sent America. And that time things were normal. Uh, you know, the Second World War, it did not break out, right? So he went to America at the age of 22 uh, to learn to learn about surgery and medicines. He had come back at 30 before his father died. He had seen Sadao become famous not only as a surgeon but as a scientist. So at the age of 30, Dr. Sadao, he returned, and before Dr. Sadao's father's death, he was able to see his son become a doctor plus a scientist, a surgeon plus scientist, because he was perfecting a discovery which would render wounds entirely clean. He had not been sent abroad with the troops. And now what happened, children? We see the presence of we see that the Second World War, it broke. I mean, the Second World War, it occurred, right? And Dr. Sadao, yeah, because he's a doctor, so obviously a doctor will always be required in a war, right? So Dr. Sadao, he was not sent with Japanese troops because he was actually perfecting a discovery that would that could help in keeping the wounds entirely clean, right? And also he knew there was some slight danger that the old general might need an operation for a condition for which he was now being treated medically, and for this possibility, Dr. Sadao was being kept in Japan. So there are actually two reasons, children. First is, let me just highlight, uh, that is, he was perfecting a discovery which would render wounds entirely clean, right? And the second, uh, because he was a very qualified general doctor or surgeon, right? So there was a general in Japanese army who was actually undergoing some treatment, right? And it was likely that he would require an operation, right? That is why Dr. Sadao was kept in Japan. He was not sent with the troops, those who were fighting the war, right? Because doctor will always be required in a war, because war means casualties, injuries, right? That is why we need. War is very dangerous. It should be avoided as much as possible. So clouds were rising from the ocean now. The unexpected warmth of the past few days had at night drawn heavy fog from the cold waves. So now in this paragraph, the author describes the scene outside Dr. Sadao's house. Uh, you could actually see the clouds, they were rising from the ocean. Now it is kind of a fog. And why is it rising from the ocean? Because the past few days were very warm. So because the days were very warm, so at night you could actually see the fog. It is actually the water vaporizing, right, from the cold waves. So Sadao watched mist hide outlines of a little island near the shore, and Dr. Sadao could see that the boundary of the nearby island, they are being engulfed by the fog. Then come creeping. Creeping means crawling, coming towards. Then they come breaking. The fog it started expanding, right? And the beach below the house, and then it the fog engulfed the beach that is in front of Dr. Sadao's house, wreathing around the pines, and that it engulfed the pine trees. And the few minutes fog would be wrapped about the house too, and then everything was covered, right, even the house. Then he would go into the room where Hannah, his wife, would be waiting for him with two children. And then Dr. Sadao, he would go back to his house, to his room, to check on his wife and his two children. But at this moment the door opened and she looked out a dark blue woolen haroi is actually it's a overcoat that is worn over kimono is a Japanese dress, right? So that's how it is pronounced. This is Japanese word. So you know, but at this moment who came outside, uh, his wife came outside. She was wearing traditional Japanese dress, and she came to him affectionately and put her arm through his as he stood. And she showed her affection for Dr. Sadao, and she put her arm through his, and they stood and they smiled and they both said nothing. He had met Hannah in America, but he had waited to fall in love with her until he was sure she was Japanese, right? So, children, Dr. Sadao, he met Hannah in America, and he actually waited. I mean, he didn't fall in love with her until and unless he found he till the time he found that she was a Japanese, right? Because Dr. Sadao's father, he was a Orthodox Japanese. So yes, that is why Dr. Sadao, he made it sure that the girl was actually uh, a Japanese. His father would never have received her unless she had been pure in her race, right? So that is the main reason, because his father would never accept any other girl than Japanese. And this is where we see this typical thinking and orthodox that we see, right? So the chapter also highlights this the obviously the discrimination between two castes, right? So this is also the chapter is highlighting that we see through the character of Dr. Sadao's father. He wondered often whom he would have married if he had not met Hannah. And maybe now obviously he is married to Hannah, and now sometimes he wonders that who he would have married if he hadn't met Mana or Hannah, right? So by what luck he had found her in the most casual way, by chance, literally at an American professor's house. And now he shares that how he met his wife Hannah, and very unexpectedly he found Hannah in an American professor's house. The professor and his wife had been kind people, anxious to do something for their few foreign students, and the students, though bored, had accepted this kindness. Sadao had all right. So the professor and his wife, they invited a few of their foreign students, and Sadao and Hannah was they were amongst them, right? Though they accepted their invitation. Um, uh, Sadao had often, obviously the professors and his wife, they were like, they were very, they, though bored, right? So, but they accepted their invitation. Sadao had often told Hannah how nearly he had not gone to Professor Harley's house that night, and it was, who was the professor? Professor Harley, and, uh, Dr. Sadao shares this with his wife that day, the day they met in America. I mean, the Dr. Sadao was very, he was very closed to as to denying the invitation, but I think he accepted. If he wouldn't have accepted, he hadn't met Hannah. The room were so small, food so bad, the professor's wife so voluble, right? So now he shares that how the invitation, the room was small, he didn't like the food, and the professor's wife, she was very outspoken, right? This is voluble means outspoken. But he had gone, and there he had found Hannah, but he was so fortunate that uh, he managed to attend the party, and that's how he found Hannah, a new student, and had felt he would love her if it were at all possible. And this is where they fall in love for each other, right? So, children, that's all for today's session, because that's what we covered in the classroom today. So you will have questions related to the covered portion. Please make sure you do them. in order to get I mean, in case in case you have any queries, you can approach. Thank you everyone. Have a nice day.